Making headlines for this week of July the 8th, World Disclosure 2016 hints that this may just be the year that life beyond Earth is finally accepted into greater mainstream consciousness. NATO Summit, Smoke and Mirrors meeting tries to show unity and force amidst an unraveling of a corrupted and dysfunctional alliance. The movement East, while not admitted publicly, quiet movement continues toward the East, away from the U.S., and failure in trust. Evidence mounts revealing that people in many countries no longer have faith in their governments.
With news around, upon, within, and beyond our planet, the program making disclosure official. This is Cosmic Vision News. Here is Jeffrey West.
Greetings and blessings to all on this July 8th World Disclosure Day. Given that one of the missions for CVN is to help advance the introduction of our galactic families to the people of Earth, this week's newscast leads with a disclosure-related story to help bring to greater focus the presence of civilizations and technologies of a non-Earth origin that are being held back from the mainstream awareness of humans worldwide, although the people of many nations are already more than familiar with this news. Today, July 8th, has been recognized by numerous within the disclosure circles as World Disclosure Day. An article appearing on the in5d.com website on July 7th notes the following about this day. World Disclosure Day is not a prediction that disclosure will happen on July 8th. It is a designated day to draw focus on the issue. Think Earth Day, for example. However, on the day the First Nation that comes forward to finally and formally acknowledge the extraterrestrial presence, that date will then become World Disclosure Day, historically recognizing the most profound event in human history. The article continues. The primary mission for World Disclosure Day is to provide a platform for people and organizations of all nations to stand together in support of the world's right to know the truth regarding an extraterrestrial presence engaging the human race. With your help, there is no limit to what can be accomplished, including 1 million endorsements, special events, and broad media coverage. People and organizations from every nation are invited to record their support for World Disclosure Day as a new component within a growing international truth movement. Disclosure is a term with very broad interpretations. The article, however, explains this distinction very well, writing that, in this instance, disclosure refers to the formal acknowledgement by world governments of an extraterrestrial presence engaging the human race, but could well refer to a long list of concerns, the truth of which still lie behind the walls of secrecy. The purpose of World Disclosure Day is to provide a focal point for people and organizations to come together to assert their right to know and demand cosmic truths being withheld from them by their governments. World Disclosure Day will also help broaden public awareness of the disclosure process and those organizations advocating for the truth on behalf of all citizens. Stephen Bassett of the Paradigm Research Group, the lone lobbyist in Washington pushing for an end of the truth embargo that has been placed upon this subject in particular, has been advocating for World Disclosure Day for several years now. In his press release promoting the awareness of World Disclosure Day, he answers the question about why July 8th was chosen. Bassett writes that on July 8th, 1947, General Roger Ramey held a press event at the 8th Army Air Force Headquarters in Fort Worth, Texas, in which he changed the just-released story of a recovered crashed disc near Roswell, New Mexico. And he changed that story to that of a retrieved Rowan weather balloon. This was the informal beginning of the now 64-year truth embargo regarding the extraterrestrial presence engaging the human race. For this reason, in 2011, PRG, the Paradigm Research Group, selected July 8th as a World Disclosure Day to close the circle and emphasize the need to reverse that now inappropriate policy. What makes this particular acknowledgement relevant, especially this week, is that while Bassett has been lobbying for some kind of acknowledgement from officials in Washington, the world either intentionally or unintentionally received an acknowledgement last week from a leader within the European Union. As was reported on last week's newscast, the unelected President of the European Commission, Jean-Claude Juncker, stood up in front of the elected parliamentary body and declared the following in French.
Il faut savoir que ceux qui nous observent de loin sont inquiets. J'ai vu et entendu et écouté plusieurs des dirigeants d'autres planètes qui sont très inquiets parce qu'ils s'interrogent sur la voie que l'Union européenne va poursuivre. Et donc il faut rassurer et les Européens et ceux qui nous observent de plus loin.
The translation of this reads as follows. You should know that those who are watching us from afar are concerned. I have seen and heard and listened to several of the leaders of other planets, and they are very worried because they are questioning whether European law will continue. Therefore, it is necessary to reassure Europeans and those from afar. It is a very loaded statement, and there are different factors to consider with this statement. As mentioned last week, the most immediate question relates to the specific galactic family members of whom he speaks. Is he referring to the negative galactic entities that have been directly and or indirectly participating in the enslavement of humanity and the destruction of our planet for profit, power, and greed? Or is he referring to the positive members of our galactic families who are here to assist the transformation of our planet and the shift in human and planetary consciousness and help humanity to break free of its enslavement? As mentioned last week, the evidence so far seems to suggest that he is referring to the negative entities that have been controlling humanity. It is unlikely that Juncker would be speaking of the positive entities because the positive entities would probably support the idea of Britain or any other country breaking away from the commercial enslavement of the global banking cabal. It is unlikely, at least to me, that they would be worried about the increasing empowerment of humans worldwide. However, the negative entities would no doubt be starting to fear that they are losing control. This therefore raises another difficult question for Juncker. In his statement, he speaks of reassuring Europeans, but also those from afar. This, at least to me personally, suggests a contradiction, especially if he is referring to entities seeking to maintain their control over humanity. EU controllers will not likely be able to reassure both groups, given the awakening in consciousness moving across the European Union at this time. Possible, but not likely. Was it an honest slip-up? The evidence does not seem to suggest this. One might argue this, and perhaps one might be willing to accept this. However, there is now the issue of the official transcript of his comments. This transcript put into record the following. Make no mistake, those who are watching us from afar are concerned. I have met and listened to several leaders. They are very worried because they are wondering about the course the European Union will take. So we must reassure Europeans and those who are watching us from further away. If it was an honest mistake, there would be no need to cover it up, as any official comments following Juncker's statements would be able to explain it. It is a huge comment to make, however, whether or not there was truth or intention in making it. Michael Salla, in an article on his exopolitics.org website, appears to support, at least to some degree, my comments of this week and last week, writing that one possible interpretation is that he meant to say that he had spoken with other planetary leaders outside of the European Union and made a simple grammatical error, as some contend. If so, then why wasn't the official transcript corrected to make it clear that he had misspoken? Furthermore, it is difficult to imagine a major world leader would make such a dramatic error in an important speech to the European Parliament without realizing it immediately and correcting that error on the spot. Taken on face value, Juncker's speech directly raises the issue that leaders of other planets, or extraterrestrials, are very concerned by the Brexit issue and its implications for the European Union. It's worth exploring why this might be the case. There are two scenarios I wish to raise here, and this is Michael Salla still writing. One is that extraterrestrials require global unity as a precondition for revealing themselves to humanity, or having their existence disclosed. If so, then the effect of Brexit is one of slowing down the process of global political unification, thereby delaying any official announcement of extraterrestrial life. If the above scenario is correct, then what becomes important is whether the extraterrestrials are acting out of positive or negative intent in making global political unity a precondition for revealing themselves. Salla closes with the following. There are other scenarios that may help explain why leaders of other worlds are concerned about Brexit and why Juncker chose the European Parliament as the forum to leak this information. Most EU parliamentarians are not part of the official loop on what would clearly be a highly classified discussion with advanced alien civilizations. Yet, Juncker chose to reveal this to them. Why? Many will be tempted to dismiss Juncker's admission of having spoken with extraterrestrials as him simply misspeaking about confidential discussions with other world leaders. However, the clumsy attempt by the European Commission to remove the leaders of other worlds reference from the official transcript of his speech, with no effort to clarify his real intent in the transcript and overall context of his speech, this suggests otherwise. Juncker's speech needs to be taken at face value and therefore provides startling evidence that we are moving from a world of geopolitics to a world of exopolitics, requiring new levels of analyses in understanding major political events on our planet, such as Brexit and the existence of extraterrestrial life. Juncker is well known to have a problem with chronic alcoholism, which may lead one to ask why he would be in the position he is in, if his addiction leads him to saying things that are not to be released, unless his addiction provides the very excuse by which truth information is revealed. Georgy Stankov, in his article on his Stankov Universal Law website, goes a little more into the bigger picture of why this statement could be relevant to humanity at this time. He writes that this union was meant to be the precursor of the New World Order with which the Archons from the Orion Reptilian Empire wanted to prevent the ascension of Gaia and humanity in the current end time. Now, Juncker gives us first-hand testimony that the former masterminds of this planet and their human stooges, the ruling cabal, are very much upset after the Brexit showed that they are losing their grip on the masses. They know that this is the end of their reign since eons of time. Stankov believes that there is no doubt that Juncker was referring to cabal controllers from a reptilian empire connected to the Orion star system. Referring again to Juncker, Stankov writes that this failed politician and notorious liar, who officially admitted that politicians should lie whenever necessary, which means always, is speaking clearly and beyond any doubt about his alien masters. This is a sign of his haplessness and his futile effort to convince the European MPs to accept the new plan of the EU forged by Germany and France to transform the EU into a rigid political union where all member countries will lose their sovereignty and democratic rights. This is the famous alien card, which already Kissinger used long ago to push the New World Order agenda of the ruling cabal. It is unlikely that he will succeed, as most EU countries have already repudiated this plan, and thus also their Orion reptilian masters. This will cause new distress to the cabal, and they must resort to some insane measures very soon. This is the most direct proof about what I have been writing since the Brexit. The ruling elite in the West is in a state of total disarray and desolation, as none of their plans seem to work anymore. They are not used to this new reality on Earth, which was fully introduced on May 30th, when the new energetic conditions of superconductivity were established at the quantum level. And here, and all systems and levels of this holographic model were made fully open and transparent to the light codes from the divine source. This has caused a massive distress to the cabal, writes Stankov, and they have entered a state of total panic in expectation of the shock and awe wave that will obliterate their entire electric networks with which they have so far effectively enslaved humanity. This will also be the day when the banking system and all stock exchanges will be shut down and the entire economic system will be paralyzed for many days and possibly weeks. But this will also be the point in time when the ID shift will happen and a substantial portion of humanity will ascend to higher dimensions. We shall transfigure our bodies into crystalline light bodies and will appear as ascended masters on the new worlds to become their spiritual leaders. Now, I realize that some of the information from Stankov that I just wrote may be a bit too much for some listeners, so I invite you to just set aside any information that you are not quite ready for and only focus on the information that feels most relevant to you in this current moment. There is a fragile interconnection between the issue of the existence of our galactic families, both positive and negative, and this diverse group around our planet that I call the global cabal and all its sub-parts. While some information will be music to the ears of some, the very same information could almost be enough to put someone over the deep end, as we say in English, meaning that it is just too much for them to safely take in and understand with clarity. Case and point. Many listeners will recall the scene from episode 1 of the X-Files reboot earlier this year, when a reporter attempts to explain the whole picture to Mulder and Scully, as well as to a young woman who asks what this group is attempting to do.
What are they trying to do?
That's the missing piece. But it's not hard to imagine. A government hiding, hoarding alien technology for 70 years at the expense of human life and the future of the planet. Driven not only by corporate greed, but a darker objective to take over of America. And then the world itself, by any means necessary, however violent.
What are they trying to do?
That's the missing piece. But it's not hard to imagine. A government hiding, hoarding alien technology for 70 years at the expense of human life and the future of the planet. Driven not only by corporate greed, but a darker objective to take over of America. And then the world itself, by any means necessary, however violent, or cruel, or efficient. By severe drought, brought on by weather wars, conducted secretly using aerial contaminants and high-altitude electromagnetic waves, in a state of perpetual war, to create problem reaction solution scenarios to distract, enrage, and enslave American citizens at home, with tools like the Patriot Act and the National Defense Authorization Act, which abridge the Constitution in the name of national security. The militarization of police forces in cities across the U.S., the building of prison camps by the Federal Emergency Management Agency with no stated purpose, the corporate takeover of food and agriculture, pharmaceuticals and healthcare, even the military and clandestine agendas to fatten, dull, sicken, and control a populace already consumed by consumers. And I encourage you all to go shopping more. A government that taps your phone, collects your data, and monitors your whereabouts with impunity. A government preparing to use that data against you when it strikes. And the final takeover begins.
to take over America.
By a well-oiled and well-armed multinational group of elites that will cull, kill, and subjugate.
Some listeners may be familiar with Carol Rosin, one of the original witnesses to come forward in 2001 when Dr. Stephen Greer announced his disclosure project at the National Press Club. On top of her information to disclose, she also shares a concerned deathbed confession of a friend and colleague, Dr. Werner von Braun.
When I was a corporate manager of Fairchild Industries in 1974 through 77, I met the late Dr. Werner von Braun in early 74. At that time, von Braun was dying of cancer, but he assured me that he would live a few more years in order to tell me about the game that was being played, that game being the effort to weaponize space, to control the Earth from space and space itself. Von Braun's purpose in life during the last years of his life, his dying years, was to educate the public and decision makers about why space-based weapons are a dumb, dangerous, destabilizing, too costly, unnecessary, unworkable, undesirable idea. The strategy that Werner von Braun taught me was that first the Russians are going to be considered to be the enemy. In fact, when I met him in 74, they were the enemy, the identified enemy. We were told that they had killer satellites. We were told that they were coming to get us and control us, the dirty commies, that whole story. First, the Russians were the enemy against whom we're going to build space-based weapons. Then terrorists would be identified, and that was soon to follow. We heard a lot about terrorism. Then we were going to identify third world country crazies. We now call them nations of concern. But he said that would be the third enemy against whom we would be needing to build space-based weapons. And the next enemy was asteroids. Now, at this point, he kind of chuckled the first time he said it. Asteroids, against asteroids, we're going to build space-based weapons. So it was funny then. And the funniest one of all was against what he called aliens, extraterrestrials. That would be the final card. And over and over and over during the 4 years that I knew him and was giving his speeches for him, he would bring up that last card. And remember, Carol, the last card is the alien card. We're going to have to build space-based weapons against aliens. And all of it, he said, is a lie. He didn't mention a timeline, but he said that it was going to be speeding up faster than anybody could possibly imagine. That the effort to put weapons in space was not only based on a lie, but would accelerate past the point of people even understanding it until it was already up there and too late.
History has shown that the global cabal puts truth in front of our faces constantly, as they have done for decades and arguably much longer. Regarding the comments made by Juncker, I put several predictions in the show summary page for last week about this story. Here are a few possibilities that we may observe over the coming weeks. If these comments made by Juncker were intentionally made, then it is possible that we may soon hear that Juncker is resigning his presidency for health reasons. If the powers in control are really upset about his comments, we may find that he is suicided or has an accident, as these comments become more well known. This may be part of a final strategy predicted by Werner von Braun on his deathbed, and we are being prepared for some kind of event or invasion being staged by the cabal and their negative ET partners because they have no cards left to play. 3. If this part of a larger disclosure-related plan, then we may also soon see other countries offering their own counter-disclosure information to support the presence of a more benevolent presence beyond Earth. Just to make this story even a bit more interesting comes an article from John Dillon of the London Daily Mirror on July the 8th. Dillon writes, "Bookies have slashed the odds on a world leader revealing the disclosure truth before the end of this year. Activists are stepping up calls today for governments around the world to formally acknowledge the extraterrestrials that are engaging the human race. Bookie William Hill has now slashed the odds of a UK Prime Minister or US President announcing aliens are visiting the planet from 1,001 to just 25 to 1. Dillon adds that Stephen Bassett is so convinced President Obama will announce disclosure before the end of the year that he has put his money where his mouth is by placing a 100-to-1 wager, dubbed the Disclosure Bet, which has a $30,000 payout. And he believes the UK Prime Minister, which looks odds-on to be Theresa May, would back up the US Commander-in-Chief. Hill had noted that in the past, any bet on disclosure had roughly 1,000 to 1 odds, but the odds have gone down dramatically. According to Hill, over the years, we have had many bets for aliens, but this is the first time that we have been worried. If we are truly going to find out, then this year's American election looks like the catalyst. Dillon also mentions Paul Hellyer, the former Canadian Deputy Prime Minister and ex-Minister of Defense, writing that Hellyer spoke out at the first Canadian national inquiry into UFOs, this was a couple of weeks ago in Brantford, claiming that a cabal of bankers, oil cartels, industrial corporations, the military, and intelligence agencies were behind the cover-up. He also believes an alien craft did crash at Roswell, and the U.S. and Canadian governments signed a deal not to tell the public about visitations. According to the website educatinghumanity.com, the number of countries that have currently disclosed information relating to their X-Files sits at 24, assuming the site has been updated as they have claimed. In alphabetical order, Argentina, Australia, Brazil, Canada, Chile, China, Denmark, Finland, France, Germany, India, Ireland, Japan, Mexico, New Zealand, Peru, Russia, Spain, Sweden, Ukraine, United Nations, United Kingdom, Uruguay, and Vatican City have done some form of X-File disclosure. The website owner also added a favorite clip from the Disclosure Project presentation by Stephen Greer. This particular clip features information from Carl Wolf, a sergeant at the time in 2001 when the Disclosure Project was announced. Wolf details his information about disclosure.
My name is Carl Wolf, and I was a precision electronics photographic repairman with a top secret crypto clearance in the United States Air Force. I was stationed at Langley Air Force Base in Virginia. In mid-1965, I was loaned to the Lunar Orbiter Project at NASA on Langley Field. Dr. Colley was in charge of that project. They had problems with a piece of electronic equipment that was bottlenecking their production of photographs. I went to the facility, and when I walked into the facility, there were scientists from all over the world. I was stunned, actually, to see people at a NASA project from all over the world. That didn't make any sense to me initially. I was taken into the laboratory where the equipment was malfunctioning. I couldn't repair it in the dark. I asked to have it removed. A airman second class was in the dark room at that time. I was also an airman second class. I was interested in how the whole process functioned, how the data got from the lunar orbiter to the laboratory. I asked the young man if he described the process to me. He did. About 30 minutes into the process, he said to me in a very distressed way, by the way, we've discovered a base on the backside of the moon. And then he proceeded to put photographs down in front of me, and clearly in these photographs were structures, mushroom-shaped buildings, spherical buildings, and towers. And at that point I was very concerned because I knew we were working in compartmentalized security. He had breached security, and I was actually frightened at that moment. And I did not question him any further. And a few moments later, someone did come into the room. I worked there for 3 more days, and I remember going home and naively thinking, I can't wait to hear about this on the evening news. And here it is, more than 30 years later, and I hope we hear about it tonight. And I will testify under oath before Congress.
We are entering a period where it is becoming more than just mere speculation about the existence of our galactic families. The most important thing about this potential disclosure is that people hold and anchor firmly the energies and intentions that this disclosure will be friendly and that it will be beneficial for humanity and the planet. This is not the time to be giving the global cabal the fear-mongered response that they are wanting and needing at this time. With the topic coming up in the US election, a bit in the UK election, and now having been mentioned in the EU Parliament, it will be significantly harder for anyone to deny this truth, because if it is being talked about at the highest levels of governance, even just to be given the attention of it, suggests that this topic means more to the leaders of the world than they were previously prepared to reveal. In geopolitical news, the NATO summit has now begun in the Polish capital of Warsaw. With more on this story, we have these two reports from Euronews.
A symbolic host city, Warsaw will see NATO's first summit to be held in Poland, and it's being described as the most important since the end of the Cold War. It's taken on even more significance in the aftermath of Brexit, with the alliance hoping to make a show of Western unity. On the streets, people are aware of the summit's seriousness. This man says it's an important meeting. The leaders have to decide how to improve the defense of Poland and eastern borders of Europe. Another local resident says there is a great threat coming from Putin. What happened to Ukraine may also happen to Poland. After Russia annexed Crimea from Ukraine in 2014 and the ensuing conflict in the east of the country, Moscow has been conducting military exercises on Europe's eastern fringes. The transatlantic alliance is expected to sign off on a new force in the Baltic, aimed at promoting peace by deterring Moscow, as this analyst explains.
We expected that NATO will decide to increase presence of forces on its eastern flank, and the clear expectations are of about 4,000 troops rotating through the Baltic states and Poland, but on persistent basis.
The Kremlin says that NATO is the aggressor by moving forces onto former Soviet territory, which it considers within its sphere of influence. Our reporter points to the historical significance of Warsaw in East-West relations. He sums up saying on the agenda of the summit are measures not only of deterrence but also of collective defense. A Moscow envoy has already described them as a threat to peace in Europe.
The NATO summit has got underway in Warsaw, aiming to show resolve amid a perceived threat from Russia. It's expected to agree formally to send 4 battalions with 3,000 to 4,000 troops to the Baltic states and eastern Poland. Britain is sending 650. The aim to reassure countries that NATO is ready to defend them while trying to avoid antagonizing Moscow.
Stability of the Euro-Atlantic region depends on security beyond our borders. While we should stand by our defense commitment, we must enhance cooperation with all partners, both in the eastern and southern neighborhood. We are not surrounded by enemies. We are surrounded by challenges.
Ukraine is not a member of NATO, but President Poroshenko has been invited and will meet allied leaders on Saturday. President Obama has called for sanctions on Moscow to be maintained until it fully complies with a ceasefire agreement in Ukraine and to help Kiev defend its sovereignty. The Baltic states and Poland fear Russia will seek to destabilize their governments. The Kremlin argues that talk of a threat from Russia is absurd and says it hopes common sense will prevail.
The NATO summit appears to be the public story being used as an excuse for leaders to get together to discuss more serious and strategic events unfolding behind the scenes. You can be sure that if the media is focusing on one thing, then there is evidently something else going on that the people are not supposed to focus on. Therefore, all these very public meetings, which waste massive amounts of taxpayer money worldwide, are going into presenting a false image to the world that Russia is the threat to the world, when it is becoming increasingly more evident that it is the US, Israel, and its partners that are causing all of the real problems. Although on the public level one perception is being maintained, or at least there is the attempt to maintain it, there are many things going on in the background, some of which we are fortunate to hear about, but very likely many others that we have not yet heard about, nor will we hear about them until the time is right. Despite what the mainstream media will attempt to mass market and sell with regards to this summit, it is virtually impossible for anyone to fully grasp the full picture of what this summit represents, without first taking into account numerous other geopolitical and geoeconomic events to put this summit into context and to understand the strategic timing and location of this event. As CVN has been reporting over the last few weeks concerning Brexit, and even longer relating to other subjects, there are events taking place all over Europe and indeed worldwide that are giving Western cabal leaders major headaches in their plans. Numerous stories are circulating about various countries wanting to have their own referendum now. In one example, a London Express article by Alex Culbertson and Agnes Kegel reports a government minister in Hungary as declaring that Hungary wants out of the European Union. This is on top of numerous other countries that have apparently expressed similar desires. Also not being reported in the mainstream media is the growing European concern over the changes that the current Polish government is attempting to make within its borders, but especially with its Supreme Court. The changes appear to be serious enough that the EU leadership feels it may be necessary to impose fresh sanctions upon Poland. Poland has also been speaking out to some degree about increased NATO aggression, and this summit may, as was reported last week, also be an attempt to gently remind Poland who the friends and enemies are. Coming up in a few moments, Jim Willey will offer a few insights on what he believes will be an increasing EU shift toward the East, but ultimately also a deeper fracture within NATO and the failing U.S. hegemony in the region. He will offer comments that suggest Germany is quietly moving to the East and that German industry is already disregarding the sanctions against Russia that the U.S. is trying to get countries to maintain. A Sputnik News article from July 17th has also reported that Zara Wagenknecht, who heads the Left Party parliamentary group in the German parliament, said that NATO is becoming an alliance of war, threatening peace in Europe. Wagenknecht, becoming well known for standing up and speaking out about the dangers of U.S.-Israeli hegemony and global control, has said that Russia must be an integral part of a new European collective security system that should be created instead of NATO. As more people and politicians start speaking out, the more NATO and its partners will need to create events that will scare people back into being controlled. The article also added that Wagenknecht explained that it was necessary to focus on easing tensions, peaceful solution of conflicts through dialogue and discussions, the steps contrary to the current Western policy of pressure on Russia, sanctions, and the exclusion of Russia from the G8 group. The current provocative policy of NATO is initiated by the United States, which is trying to retain its dominance in the region, said Wagenknecht. The article reported on the 7th that the German parliament, the Bundestag, will vote on a resolution on establishment of a collective security system from Lisbon to Vladivostok instead of NATO, introduced by the Left Party. An article on Germany's Spiegel.de news website from back in 2010 outlined a desire by Russian President Putin to have a pan-European and Asian trade union from Lisbon in the west of Europe to Vladivostok in the east of Asia. The article writes, "No more tariffs, no more visas, vastly more economic cooperation between Russia and the European Union." That's the vision presented by Russian Prime Minister Putin in an editorial contribution to the German daily Süddeutsche Zeitung in November of 2010. According to Putin at that time, "We propose the creation of a harmonious economic community stretching from Lisbon to Vladivostok," Putin writes. "In the future, we could even consider a free trade zone or even more advanced forms of economic integration. The result would be a unified continental market with a capacity worth trillions of euros." According to RT Ruppli, the German RT network, in the video coverage of the German parliament, the resolution proposed by the Left Party for this Lisbon-Vladivostok initiative was voted on and defeated, although the parliament was more than half empty. If I understood correctly, the vote appeared to be 68 to 65, in favor of defeating the motion. The video will be in the show summary for German listeners wishing to verify. According to a personal friend of mine, Germans are becoming very tired of NATO, of immigration, of Russian sanctions, and also of Chancellor Merkel. So this resolution may not be completely dead yet. NATO has been extremely fearful, not of Russian military aggression, although this is the excuse, but rather they are more fearful of the new paradigm that Russia and China are creating, the new Silk Road Alliance, the Eurasian trade economic paradigm that is referred to and meant by the Lisbon-Vladivostok Initiative. And as mentioned last week, a united Europe that is interested in trade and economic relations with Russia and the East would deal a death blow not only to the US dollar, but to US geopolitical control. As the Euro project continues to weaken, as NATO continues to fracture, as countries see more value in moving east rather than supporting US sanctions that harm more countries in Europe than the US itself, and as the public continues to awaken, it is becoming more evident that the US cabal leadership and NATO leadership are desperate to keep Russia and Europe from uniting. Meanwhile, with all the floods, protests, and more awakening going on in Europe, the US establishment appears to be in absolute fear that the public will figure out the charade being played out, as there has been a significant rise in the number of false flag shooting events designed to keep people distracted in fear, so they will not be interested in learning more about all that is happening worldwide, which is empowering more and more people to stand up and take action against all the various factions of this global cabal in numerous countries around Europe and the world in general. In financial news, it is getting increasingly more difficult to separate financial news from the geopolitical news, because now that the truth is finally starting to sink in with people that it has been bankers and corporations manipulating global markets and military events, they are also beginning to realize that these same events have contributed to all of the geopolitical problems currently being experienced all over the planet. If history has taught us anything, it is that war is profitable, and that the mainstream media can pretty much make anyone think any way the global controllers want us to think, as long as we don't think for ourselves. An article appearing on the Zero Hedge website on July the 7th is reporting the following. When most recently reporting on the latest European banking crisis, yesterday we observed a surprising development involving Deutsche Bank, namely the bank's decision to quietly liquidate some of its shipping loans. As Reuters reported, Deutsche Bank is looking to sell at least 1 billion of shipping loans to lighten its exposure to the sector whose lenders face closer scrutiny from the European Central Bank. They are looking to lighten their portfolio, and this includes toxic debt. It makes commercial sense to try to sell off some of their book, one finance source said. Deutsche Bank, which has around $5 billion to $6 billion worth of total exposure to the shipping sector, declined to comment. This confirms what had long been speculated, if not confirmed, namely that German banks have been some of the biggest lenders to the shipping sector, a sector which has since found itself in significant trouble as a result of the ongoing slowdown in global trade. And now it appears that some shipping loans gone very bad could be the catalyst for Europe's banking crisis to finally breach the most impenetrable border of all, that being Germany. Because it is in Germany where we find that what may be the next domino to fall as part of Europe's latest banking crisis incarnation, another bank, Bremen Landesbank, could be part of this. German banks are in trouble, and one part of the reason has been the German support of forced U.S. sanctions on Russia that have hurt Germany but not the U.S. Germany has been forging closer ties with China for quite some time. German news website Spiegel Online reported even back in 2012 Chancellor Merkel opening up what was called, at that time, a cozy new relationship with China when she and most of her cabinet traveled there on a diplomatic offensive. Merkel was again in China in June, Angela Stenzel, writing on June 15th for The Diplomat, reported that Chancellor Merkel's recent and 9th visit to China to attend the annual government-to-government consultations might have been the most difficult one so far. This time, Merkel arrived with a much longer list of pressing issues to discuss than before, including issues such as market economy status, overcapacity in steel exports, the South China Sea dispute, and the rule of law. Although unconfirmed at this time, there have been some alternative news reports suggesting that Merkel has struck a deal with China to bail out the German banks. If these reports are true, it would suggest a further movement by Germany to the east, and this would therefore suggest that an end to the European Union as we currently know it will likely also occur. And thus, it is becoming important for NATO to continue to make Russia the threat to the world to prevent the European-Russian-Chinese unity that appears to be emerging. Jim Willey, in a recent interview on the Vinnie Eastwood Show, offered some insights on what was unfolding. The interview was posted on July 8th, and thus I didn't have the time to hear the whole thing. He mentions Germany a little further in, but here are a few selected excerpts from the first 30 minutes.
I think it was about a year and a half ago, I said the petrodollar is going to be dismantled and look for a great deal of disruption. And it could come in the derivatives sector, which is a sector where you might have these very large, like $100 billion contracts linking the dollar with the crude oil price, linking the euro currency with the crude oil price. Right now, I think we're going to have a gradual flip of Germany toward the east. And it's going to be very slow. I made this forecast in the middle of 2014. I said a lot of things have to happen in order for the forecast to come true. And we're starting to see the elements now of an internal revolt within the German government structures. And it's being led, by and large, from the industrial captains of the German industrial sector, their economy. And now we're starting to see some evidence of that. I got an indication, Vinny, from a German client. He wrote me and said there are approximately 500 different contact points being made between German industry and Russian large corporations right now. Germany decided to ignore the Russian sanctions. So I think what's going to happen in the next few months is that the European Union and its Commission are going to be largely ignored. Ignored for the sanctions, ignored for GMO food declarations on labeling, ignored for the transatlantic investment partnership, the trade union, the TTIP. And, it really going to be a big invitation for countries to exit the euro, exit the European Union, maybe soon stop paying taxes to Brussels. That's where rubber hits the road.
You've chosen forecasting as the main thing that you do, whereas other people would choose economic history or economic current affairs. Why did you choose forecasting specifically?
Well, I chose gold specifically. I did a post-mortem after some damage to my own financial status in the year 2000, and the several months of study that I did led me to the conclusion that the problem is phony money. The problem is central bank power. The problem is enormous deficits, debt saturation. And what is really needed, I came to this conclusion in 2001, what we really need is a gold standard. We need to get off this fiat currency road. It's a false road. It has a bad ending. I started writing about gold, Vinny. That was what I chose. I thought the solution's going to be gold, and the problem was that we got off the gold standard in 71. And it has deadly consequences. It means that there's no limit to creating money. There's no limit to permitting credit growth. And the consequences are pretty much a saturation, like filling your living room with water. Eventually, your head hits the ceiling and your couch is floating. The first article that I really think made a splash was 25 Reasons Why Gold Will Rise. And this was in response to some disgust that I had, because I was reading things like, well, gold is rising. This is 2003, remember? Gold is rising because of the Palestinian situation. Are you kidding me? Gold is rising because the interest rates are below the price inflation. We got negative real interest rates. That's why gold is rising. That was the fuse that started this gold revolt. The interest rates went down, down, down under Greenspan. He urged people to borrow money against their homes, made it very easy for everybody to do that, but the easy money led to some price inflation right away, and we always had price inflation. We always have 3 to 5% more price inflation than they admit, and the result was the interest rates were below the inflation rate. And that historically has been a fuse to light the gold switch, the gold dynamite. And here we are. It's even worse now. We've got 8 to 10% price inflation, and now we have 1.3 something percent on the 10-year bond for the U.S. Treasuries. By the way, about 4 or 5 months ago, I forecasted that the U.S. Treasuries would go down to 1.5 and then 1.3. Another correct forecast. Remember Fed speak with Alan Greenspan? And he would talk about liquidity and offloading risk to derivatives. And then Bernanke came in and we had the alphabet soup, all kinds of different liquidity facilities. What the hell is a liquidity facility? Well, I'll tell you what it is. When all your big banks are insolvent, you better not let them get illiquid, because they'll all go bust. So you better put in liquidity facilities so they don't all go bankrupt.
Liquidity, I needed to explain this to people, actually. They don't know what it is. So let's say you've got an overdraft on your checking account and some kind of unexpected bill comes in, and then you don't have any extra money in your account to pay your other bill that has to come in, and then you get some kind of dishonor fee or whatever, and then you get kicked out of your house, and there's this whole bunch of extra bad consequences as a result of just not having that extra $20. Enter the extra liquidity account, right? All it does is give you the extra that you need right there to make sure you don't get kicked out of your house, and then you quickly pay it back. Or at least that's supposed to be what it is, so that the economy can breathe underwater, as it were.
I think you got it right.
The Brexit vote is some kind of ruse, and it's going to lead up to the breakup of the EU, and that the EU is going to morph into something even worse, right? And I'm thinking, that sounds really far-fetched and incredibly terrible.
I think you have it right. I think there might be some more agenda behind the Brexit vote. I think they made a miscalculation, and now they're trying to capitalize on a situation that they've lost control a little bit. But as they lost control of England, they may be tightening their control of the European Union. And as that happens, and they try to tighten the control, they're going to lose their member nations. I think Great Britain is doing an FU. Let me try to explain what I think Brexit might have been. Since when does Britain take orders from anybody? They're not going to take orders from Brussels anymore. This was a declaration of sovereign power by Britain. They're not going to fall under the wing of Brussels. Secondly, they might not have appreciated that Britain wants to do financial deals with China and commercial deals with Russia. So they don't want to go through Brussels. And they're not going to anymore. And I don't care whether it's final yet. They're going to make deals now. Notice what happened at the St. Petersburg Economic Forum just 2 weeks ago. There were about 50 different billion-dollar magnitude deals cut with Russia. Every single one of them in violation of the sanctions. This is my point about the European Union being ignored. As they make more power moves, they're going to be ignored further. As they make more rules and regulations, they're going to be ignored further.
Observe carefully and without attachment the events that continue to unfold over the coming weeks and couple of months, and note how events are happening at an increasing speed and the effects that they have on different people experiencing them, reporting on them, and also talking about them. It may be an appropriate time to remind some listeners and also to gently inform new listeners to pay close attention to what you are listening and watching these days. You can get a sense of where people are in their energies and in their beliefs by listening to how they describe the events unfolding at this time. If what is being said has only or mostly fear attached to it, the individual or the media outlet is most likely attached to the old paradigm, the one that is disappearing, and is thus causing the anxiety being experienced. It is a fear of the unknown. On the opposite side, however, for those who are able to connect the dots and see a more positive vision unfolding, even amidst all that appears negative, one may be able to understand and feel that breaking our current addictions to the old paradigm will not come easily, nor will it happen comfortably. It can, however, be less painful with greater awareness. Change is happening much more rapidly, and it is becoming much more visible to the general public at this time. I cannot emphasize enough the importance, however challenging it is at this time, and given the frustrations that so many of us are feeling, that we do our very best to hold the outcome for the highest good of each human and the highest good for humanity and also our planet. In the final words this week, I'll take a look a bit at the role we are each here to serve at this time. In general news, in what may be perceived as either good news or bad news, depending upon the perspective that one chooses to take, an article appearing on the Atlantic News website reported on July the 1st what many worldwide have long known or suspected. Trust in government is collapsing around the world. According to this article by Yuri Friedman, on Wednesday, Facebook made an announcement that you'd think would only matter to Facebook users and publishers. It will modify its newsfeed algorithm to favor content posted by a user's friends and family over content posted by media outlets. The company said the move was not about privileging certain sources over others, but about better connecting people and ideas. But Richard Edelman, the head of the communications marketing firm Edelman, sees something more significant in the change, proof of a new world of self-reference that, once you notice it, helps explain everything from Donald Trump's appeal to Britain's vote to exit the European Union. Elites used to possess outsized influence and authority, Edelman notes, but now they only have a monopoly on authority. Influence largely rests with the broader population. People trust their peers much more than they trust their political leaders or news organizations. Before I continue, let's just look at that for a moment. Most are becoming aware of how Facebook has been sold out and is arguably mining for people's more private information. There are two possibilities, at least, to consider here. Facebook is stopping the promotion of media articles over personal sharings by people because Facebook feels the media is no longer relevant to the minds of the people. Depending upon the media, there is arguably some truth to that. The other possibility is that more and more people are turning to alternative media, so FB is attempting to censor and analyze the new media and put greater focus on people sharing useless information such as pictures of what they ate last night or selfies in front of the mirror showing off a new tattoo, hairdo, or whatever else. Perhaps they may even be sharing alternative news, and this is a form of monitoring. Either the general public is choosing to become more informed, and this is the threat, or that they are being dumbed down further by being interested in meaningless antics of others that contribute nothing to the continued awakening of the human and planetary consciousness. Like anything, FB, Facebook, is only a tool, and when used wisely and honorably, can become something effective for staying informed. The potential is also there, as most know, for this social media tool to be abused. The article continues. For 16 years, Edelman's company has been surveying people around the world on their trust in various institutions. And one of the firm's findings is that people are especially likely these days to describe, quote-unquote, a person like me, a friend, or say a Facebook friend, as a credible source of information. A person like me is now viewed as twice as credible as a government leader, Edelman said at the Aspen Ideas Festival, which is co-hosted by the Aspen Institute and The Atlantic. The result of all this is the deepening distrust of institutions, especially the government and the media, among mass populations in many countries. In the years since the financial meltdown of 2008, people have become increasingly aware that their lives are not likely to return to any standard of living that they may have had before the collapse. The view is generally very dim. Edelman was quoted as saying that between the top 25% of income earners and the bottom 25% of income earners, there's a 31-point gap in trust in institutions in the United States. The article also notes a gap of 29 points in France, 26 points in Brazil, 22 points in India, and 19 points in the UK. There is a perception that business, especially tech-oriented businesses, have a reputation for getting things done and at least providing something of value. In this sense, people have leaned more towards trusting businesses rather than institutions of leadership. The article adds that in democratic systems, this deep distrust of government is corrosive. For democracies to function properly, the German journalist Heinrich Müller recently wrote, "There must be enough common values that people trust their institutions, that majorities and minorities respect one another, and that everyone generally deals fairly with one another." It is similar to being caught between a rock and a very hard place. On the one hand, we want our vote to mean something, but it is becoming increasingly clear that our votes do not mean much. Yes, if we do not exercise our right to change, does one have the right to complain? We're damned if we do vote, because this suggests that the public has therefore consented to everything that the incoming government will do, even if they didn't tell us before the election. We're damned if we don't vote, because the unawakened, ill-informed people who still do vote will then be speaking on behalf of all the informed people who are revoking their consent. It is pretty much an all-or-nothing affair. Everyone votes and they all vote for informed change, or they all do not vote and signal their lack of consent to the institution of governance that has become corrupted to the degree that it has. This is what democracy was supposed to come to, but this is why the truth about the illusion of democracy is coming out now, alongside the truths of so many other subjects relevant to the time we are now living in. Perhaps this next news story offers just one such example of why people are losing increasing trust in our institutions of leadership. People historically have generally been conditioned to accept as truth information coming out from the media or people in positions of leadership or authority. It has been mostly for this reason that so many rules have been imposed and enforced upon humans worldwide. CVN has looked at the 3 mega trade deals over the last few weeks: the Trans-Pacific Partnership, the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership, and the Trade-in Services Agreements, the TPP, the TTIP, and the TISA. CVN has been helping to reveal some of the information, exposing what these documents will do to humanity and our planet, and it also explains why these trade deals have been kept so secretive, with no details being revealed by leaders to the public, except those that are planned and those that have been leaked. It comes down to this. Are the leaders saying what most people are wanting to hear as truth, to justify the reality that is comfortable for them, or is the leader challenging the status quo and speaking an inconvenient truth? At the beginning of the newscast, we were reminded of what Jean-Claude Juncker said last week at the EU Parliament. As a leader, can his statements be taken as truth, or will someone now try to discount them because he is, technically speaking, a non-elected official? John Hillary, writing for the London Independent last year, reported on one singular statement made by an official in Brussels that he felt exposed everything that is wrong with the TTIP agreement, the European agreement, the one that applies predominantly to all the countries around Europe. The same logic, however, applies to all internationally negotiated trade agreements. In October of last year, Hillary explains that he was granted a rare glimpse behind the official facade of the EU when I met with its trade commissioner in her Brussels office. I was there to discuss the TTIP, the controversial treaty currently under negotiation between the EU and the USA. As Trade Commissioner, Cecilia Malmström occupies a powerful position in the apparatus of the EU. She heads up the Trade Directorate of the European Commission, the post previously given to Peter Mandelson when he was forced to quit frontline politics in the UK. This puts her in charge of trade and investment policy for all 28 EU member states, and it is her officials that are currently trying to finalize the TTIP deal. If one is not willing to take the time to read the trade documents themselves and learn about the rules that are being sold to humans worldwide, then perhaps hear it straight from the mouth of the woman negotiating for Europe. Hillary continues, explaining that he challenged Malmström over the huge opposition to TTIP across Europe. In the last year, a record 3.25 million European citizens have signed the petition against it. Thousands of meetings and protests have been held across all 28 EU member states, including a spectacular 250,000-strong demonstration in Berlin. Again, this is referring to October of last year. What Hillary got next is the piece of information that appeared to shock him the most. He writes, Malmström acknowledged that a trade deal has never inspired such passionate and widespread opposition. Yet, when I asked the Trade Commissioner how she could continue her persistent promotion of the deal in the face of such massive public opposition, her response came back icy cold. I do not take my mandate from the European people. Hillary then openly wonders from whom Malmström does take her mandate. He continues, officially, EU commissioners are supposed to follow the elected governments of Europe. Yet, the European Commission is carrying on the TTIP negotiations behind closed doors without the proper involvement of European governments, let alone MPs or members of the public. British civil servants have admitted to us that they have been kept in the dark throughout the TTIP talks, and this makes their job impossible. This article was written before the recent UK referendum, and Hillary had speculated in his article what the UK people would be asked ahead of any referendum. The question is not whether the British wish to remain Europeans. Hillary closes with the following reflection. Rather, we will be asked whether we wish to remain subject to the institutions of the European Union, including the unelected Commission. As the people of Greece have learned through bitter experience, those institutions will not tolerate any reform or deviation from their blueprint of permanent austerity and corporate rule. If one is not willing to listen to oneself at this time, but remain dependent upon others for their so-called truth, it would be wise to understand who or what is really controlling the leaders and institutions that one is choosing to place one's faith and trust in. In the legal commercial world, this is called due diligence, and the public has as much of a need now, more than ever before, to do its due diligence upon people and entities claiming to be acting on behalf of humanity and our planet. Finally, in health-related news this week, I am choosing to air an extended presentation this week in its entirety because I have a feeling that this will offer something for a lot of people. It gave me a lot to think about, but it also brought some of the fears that I have been keeping inside up to the surface for greater observation. We are all dealing with issues that, on some level, we feel are only happening to us, and that no one will understand what one is feeling. This is perhaps both true and untrue. The physical experience that one has may not be unique. What is unique, however, are the mental, the emotional, and even the spiritual parts of that experience. How one chooses to interpret, define, feel, and grow from any physical experience is dependent upon the uniquely different set of life path experiences that each individual has. Because in this sense, no two humans, regardless of however many criteria they share in common, race, religion, culture, gender, orientation, and so on, no two humans will ever be exactly alike. The world we are currently in presents challenges, to the likes of which we have never experienced before, at least perhaps in this incarnation. Stress in all forms, from endless sources. Chemicals that are being forced into us via air, water, food, pills, drinks, injections, and treatments. Happiness and joy are being driven out of us, and the challenge is to be aware of this and to try to find ways to bring it back. Take, for example, sex. Our society has conditioned so many of us to the point where the sex drive in both men and women is almost non-existent. People say they want it, and they may even believe that they want it, but if or when a time comes to have such an opportunity, something may change. In a TED Talk presentation in Vancouver, Maureen McGrath addresses numerous levels to an issue that no doubt sits heavily on the minds of many in dealing with the changes we are going through and especially how to deal with them in our partners.
Sex is one of the most contentious issues in marriage today, second only to finances. There are many married couples that have not had sex for months, even years, and that's okay, as long as they're okay with it and happily married. The problem arises when one person in the relationship wants sex and the other doesn't. According to a national newspaper survey of approximately 10,000 respondents, mostly married men, 75% were satisfied in their relationship, but more than 50% were dissatisfied with their sex lives. We're having sex, don't get me wrong, we're just having sex at the wrong time and with the wrong people. I'll get to that later. We're having sex before we get married, 10 years on average. So we are effectively in a long-term relationship and potentially quite sexually bored before we even mess up the marital bed. And that has its consequences. Most brides today do not have sex on their wedding nights, and 50% of men would not have married their spouse had they known their marriage was going to be sexless. So, everybody wants to know just how much sex are married people having, whether they are in heterosexual relationships or same-sex unions. You all want to know what's going on at the Joneses. Well, not much. Only about 7% of married couples set the sheets ablaze. Most married couples have sex a little bit more than once a week for the first decade of their marriage. It decreases after that. So they have sex about 58 times a year. And 20% of marriages meet the criteria as a sexless marriage. And that, defined by the experts, is sex less than 10 times a year. So why aren't we having sex in our marriages? Well, there's a little-known chemical in the brain, conveniently called PEA, or P, and it's responsible for the elation, the excitement, and the euphoria that you feel when you meet somebody that you are sexually interested in. It's a fantastic feeling. This chemical is scourging through your blood vessels. You are so happy. That's how powerful this little chemical is. Well, what happens after 2 years, that chemical diminishes, as does sexual frequency. That's just about the time you might get married or may have conflict in your relationship. And that is why communication is key to great sex. Now, there's another reason we're not having sex in our relationship, and that has to do with the sex education that we provide. I'd like to share a story about myself. When I was a teenager, my mother came racing into my bedroom, and she said, "Maureen, please tell me you have not allowed a boy to French kiss you." She was feeling terrible that this sex education came a bit late. And I was feeling horrifically guilty as an Irish Catholic girl that I'd French kissed a number of boys by that stage. We teach girls and women that sex is dirty and sex is bad, or it's overrated. We say you're just going to get a sexually transmitted infection anyway, or you might get pregnant. This whole fear-based thing frightens women from enjoying sex. And we never talk about pleasure with girls and women, or orgasm. And in fact, some women say orgasm's not important, and that the journey is just as good as the destination. I disagree. Of course. I'm the one who French kissed all the boys as an Irish Catholic girl. It's like getting on a train with your lover, and you are going to the most pleasurable place on the planet. You are so excited. You're getting lubed up with all the free drinks they're giving you. This is amazing. And just before you reach your destination, he gets off, and you don't. You get my point. Now, the sex education we have for boys and men, that's entirely different. It's a global program. It's free. It's accessible to everybody. And it's known as internet pornography. Fantastic. And it does nothing to teach men and boys about intimacy, which is really important to men and boys, or how to make love to anybody. Also, we have a paucity of information about sexual health for our LGBTQI community, and we need to add to that. Now, marriage can rapidly go from holy matrimony to holy hell, with the finances, the kids, the houses, the illness. I mean, you may have signed up for sickness and health, but that was long before you'd ever witnessed a man cold. And how about that richer or poorer thing? Ladies, we're going to have to start going for richer. Most women today are working inside and outside of the home. We're doing the lion's share of the housework because, according to research, men don't feel they're that good at it. And we're bridging the gap between growing children and aging parents. We are exhausted doing it all and never doing it. And when we are doing it, we're checking our smartphones. 10% of people check their smartphones during sex. 35% immediately afterward. We are connected to the internet and disconnected from our would-be lovers. I have a clinical practice where I see patients that have sexual dysfunction. And there are two questions that I ask everybody. And the first one is, are you sexually active? It's obvious. And when I ask women, they never say yes or no. Well, they never say yes, but they never say yes or no. They say sometimes, sort of, I'm not sure. He is. Or they say, I'm married. I say, well, that means no to me. They say, yes, you're right, it is no. Most men complain that women never initiate sex. The reason for this is because, once again, the sex education we provide to women. Women falsely believe that female sexual interest, desire, precedes sexual activity, when in actuality, it is sexual activity that prompts sexual interest and desire. Sexual arousal emerges as a result of sexual activity. So, you guys, I know, intimacy is important to you. And the most important question that reflects this that I received from you is, how much masturbation is too much masturbation? So, I just say, well, as long as you can go to work, you should be fine. And then I realized that that's perhaps all that you're doing at work. So, I know intimacy is important. You want to come home and you want to make love to your wife if you're in a heterosexual relationship. So after a long and quite possibly very hard day, you come home to a bit of chaos perhaps, but you've just got sex on the mind, and she says, did you remember the milk? And you're like, darn, the milk. I forgot the milk. Don't beat yourselves up about it. If not for the milk, we have Facebook, hormones. I'm feeling a little tired tonight. My stomach's sticking out. I'm feeling kind of fat. Can't do it tonight. Didn't we have sex last month? And you're like, that was actually last year? You don't get it. I mean, literally, you don't get it. But you're like, she's amazing. She works in and outside of the home. She does a great job with the kids. She volunteers. She even has time for girls' nights out. So I brought a friend home after one such girls' night out. As we approached her house, she looked up to her bedroom window, saw that the lights were on, and she said, Donnie's waiting up for me. Do me a favor, drive around the block a few times until the light goes out. I said, listen, you get in there and make love to your husband before somebody else does, because that is one thing that will increase a woman's sexual desire when someone else wants her man. Still unconvinced, she said, I decided to extol the health and beauty benefits that sex has for a woman. A youthful glow, better sleep, wrinkle-free skin. Keep driving, she said. There is a device that will increase anybody's sexual desire, and that happens to be the Mercedes-Benz 4MATIC Convertible SL. And it comes in 64 colors. But if that doesn't do it, the desire to have a baby will rev up any woman's sex drive. The problem is, having that baby is likely to kill it, along with any marital eroticism a couple may have had. Because a lot of people believe that motherhood and being sexual is incongruous. John followed me on LinkedIn for 2 years before he mustered up the courage to make an appointment about his sexless marriage. He'd been married for 7 years, and they had never consummated the relationship. Their parents were pressuring them to have children because they wanted grandchildren. When they came into my clinical practice, the second question that I ask everybody that enters my clinical practice, most unfortunately, is, have you ever experienced sexual abuse or unwanted sexual advances as a child? This was the first time this gentleman had learned that his wife had experienced sexual abuse as a 6-year-old at the hands of her best friend's father. She thought sex was dirty. She hated sex. We need a worldwide moratorium on ending sexual violence on our children, boys and girls, because it happens to both. Healing from sexual abuse takes a lifetime. Ella had lived a lifetime. A widow, she said she wasn't sexually active, but she hoped to be. I thought, fantastic, somebody is going to have sex here. But she said, the problem, Maureen, is that these old guys can't get it up anymore. I said, well, Ella, you might have to go for a younger guy. She said, what's younger when you're 84? 70? Yes, some of you are saying. The hard truth is that men in their 30s and 40s may experience erectile dysfunction. Ella is going to have to go for a millennial. So you're all probably thinking, what's the big deal? Why treat my erectile dysfunction? Well, I liken the penis to a plane. If the pilot can't get the plane up in the air and keep the plane in the air for the entire trip, there's probably a problem with the engine. So if you can't get your penis up and keep it up for the entire sexual experience, there's likely a problem with your engine. Well, that's your heart. Erectile dysfunction is the canary in the coal mine, and it may signify cardiovascular disease. It may also indicate diabetes. So these two medical conditions, in addition to low testosterone, stress, substance use and abuse, excessive alcohol consumption, unresolved conflict, financial issues, all of those may contribute to low sexual desire, and you may end up in a sexless marriage. George presented to my clinical practice. At age 40, he decided to settle down. He was marrying a beautiful and accomplished woman in a few months. There's only one problem. George was gay. George could not bear to tell his family that he was gay because he felt it would have shamed the entire family. I said, George, you're going to end up in a sexless marriage. He said, tell me something I don't know. So George said to me, his plan was this. Well, when my parents die, I'm then going to divorce this woman, and I'm going to marry the man that I love. And I said, George, you are not thinking straight. Sex is the barometer of the state of affairs in a marriage. People who live in sexless marriages report feeling frustrated, unloved, undesirable, unattractive, and the worst of all, lonely. And loneliness has been shown to increase vascular resistance and elevate blood pressure and lead to an early death. You are more likely to die from loneliness than you are from obesity or excessive alcohol consumption. When I educate women and I say, if you're not having sex with your husband, someone else may, they get upset and they say that I'm blaming women for men's bad behavior, when in actuality, I'm doing a community service. You see, men in sexless marriages cheat to remain in that marriage in general, and women cheat to leave a sexless marriage. And women cheat too. Nobody ever thinks we do. We're just sneakier about it. We just don't get caught. We're socialized very differently. This is one thing we have on you guys. Women cheat with other men, and women cheat with other women.
And technology has made cheating accessible for everybody, from the politician to the stay-at-home parent. That quick swipe right
can lead to an online, passionate love affair, from texting to sexting to secret phone conversations. The more two people communicate online, the more likely an in-person encounter will occur. But you can always blame your genes. The gene DN4N has been isolated in cheaters, and the sexless marriage, just the environment to turn on that gene. It's based on a system of pleasure and reward. The stakes are high, the reward substantial. It is the perfect cocktail to turn that love drug back on, PEA, and the cycle begins again. Historically, marriage was not based on mutual love, but rather it was an institution to acquire, of all things, in-laws, property, and physical labor. But at the turn of the 20th century in America, egalitarian ideals and the emerging Hollywood movie industry burdened marriages with promising romantic love forever. And now we're living forever. Fantastic. Congratulations. You get to have sex with the same person for the rest of your life. The second most common question that I hear from patients is, when does sex end? Well, a 44-year-old asked me, he said, when does sex end, Maureen? 65? I answered him this way. A 22-year-old asked me, when does sex end, Maureen? 35? Everybody's older until you get there. I'm here to tell you that sex never ends. If you're healthy, you can have a great sex life well into your 80s and 90s. Sex is good for you. Sex is healthy, yet sex is shrouded in shame. In the ancient aristocracies, the wealthy men had courtesans for pleasure and concubines for quick sex. In the way we're going, computers will be our concubines. Internet pornography, our mistress of the day. Technology is fast replacing human connection at high speed. So how do you rev up the sexless marriage? Sex is about blood flow. Sexercise. Every day you want to have a daily workout. It increases your agility, your stamina. Women will experience more sexual sensation when blood is flowing to the genitalia. It also helps to treat erectile dysfunction. Also, get help for any of the sexual dysfunctions you may have. Vaginal dryness, it's an issue that happens to women who are on the oral contraceptive pill, who are breastfeeding, perimenopausal, postmenopausal, and there are treatments for you. Pay more attention to your spouse than you do your smartphone. Spend more time in your bedrooms than you do your boardrooms, or your bedrooms are going to become boardrooms. Deal with your marital issues. Go to sleep in the same bed at the same time, and don't bring anything or anyone into your marriage except for a great sex toy and a darn good sex therapist. You must establish guidelines that govern those moments when you are struck by someone's attractiveness outside of your marriage. But don't think for a second that you have to have sex with the same person for the rest of your life. That's not what I mean. In your mind, that is. Fantasy is key. Your brain is your largest sex organ. And one more thing. I would like to leave you all off with a bang. Settle all marital arguments in the bedroom, naked.
In this week's final words, are you a member of the 1%? I can almost hear the vast majority of you, perhaps 98% of you, saying no in whatever way you choose to say that to me. There may be 1 or 2% of the global elitists or their partners or their puppets who are paying attention to my humble newscast, just to stay on top of whatever I may be sharing to help empower people to awaken and serve humanity and the planet. I am, however, not speaking of the elitist 1%, but rather a different 1%. This 1% of people are within the 99% who are not a part of the global elitists. An article on the Life Coach Code website on July 1st explains, when we say the global elite, we think of the wealthiest 1% who thrive through global consumerism. They don't care about the result of their products as long as it brings massive profit. However, in that massive 99% of the world, there is a tiny 1% that may be the key to restoring balance to the world. It's not a secret society with some sinister agenda to take over the world. No, these individuals are all around us. Most of them have never even met each other. A lot of them don't even know what's happening, but they can all feel it. They can all feel that there is something wrong with society and the way it functions. The article continues. Suddenly, these individuals stop caring about what brand they wear. They see through the BS of media. They tend to unite the good from the indigenous and the modern in a new sustainable lifestyle. They prefer walks in nature and nights around a campfire over getting drunk in clubs. They desire healthy organic food over processed food, no matter the taste. They see the world as their home and the people as its global citizens. They love animals, nature, and every human being as they realize we are all one. They see the world's greatest lie. You are not enough, and this is their freedom. That's why they cannot be controlled into consuming products that harm the world. These individuals, completely unintentionally, show an alternative to the global consumerism. They show that in nature there is everything that you need, and in there everything is free. They open a doorway to a new lifestyle where you are free from filling the endless void of your ego and you can focus on what truly matters, ascending into a higher frequency. That's why they will shatter the global elite's plan. The article closes with the following. Are you one of these people? Do you feel that there is something wrong with society? Do you feel lost as you are walking amongst people who are asleep? Do some, if not all, of the traits we mentioned above apply to you? Don't worry, it simply means that you are awakening. Why? Nobody knows for sure. Maybe it's a higher plan of the universe, or maybe there is something else in play. Keep in mind that you are not alone. Daryl Anka, who channels an entity named Bashar, has commented on a topic very similar to this sometime in the past. As always, I invite listeners who do not normally accept messages of this nature to disregard the source of information and focus only on what is being said. How does the information feel to you personally? For me personally, I found this message to be especially intriguing as it offers an insight that humanity created the positive ET presence to act as our reminder of who we are, and in this way assist us out of the darkness of our human journey towards remembering who we are. Create a wonderful week. Until our next moment of now, I leave you with Daryl Anka and Bashar commenting on your choice to be on planet Earth at this time.
The reason that you are where you are is because you chose to be where you are in order to act as a conduit to bring that energy to Earth and manifest it in whatever way is relevant to the Earth experience, to allow the Earth to transform. Because every single one of you that are on Earth now, in some way, shape, or form, chose to be on Earth now because you knew that you would be going through a transition and a transformation at this time in your planet's history, and on some level, in some way, you wanted to participate. You wanted to be a part of that, because it's a very exciting place to be right now. As you say in your language, it's where it's happening. It is one of the most highly focused places right now that we are aware of in creation for the idea of transition and transformation. It is one of the few places that has gone as deeply into the dark as you have, that we are aware of. And thus then, when a planet, when a civilization, when a collective consciousness can allow itself to experience such a great degree of darkness and yet still find its way to the light, that is special. That is powerful. And believe me, you attract the attention of many other beings from many other dimensions to see how you did it, how you're doing it, because that's exciting, because that's creation in the making. That's raw creation, going from absolute dark to absolute light. That's creation in a nutshell. So thank you for your strength, for your commitment, for your willingness to go through this transition. It's a powerful thing to have done, and it shows you, just by being where you are, it shows you how powerful you actually are. So never lose sight of that. To be where you are on Earth at this time means you are powerful beings who knew what you were doing when you chose this reality, and even though you have forgotten that you knew what you were doing, you still know what you're doing. One of the ways you have allowed yourself to co-create a way to remember that you knew what you were doing is through your creation of us. Bringing an opportunity to you to remind you, which we are happy to do, to remind you of how powerful you are. So we thank you for the opportunity, we thank you for the gift you have bestowed upon us to allow us to be those that remind you who you are. Thank you for allowing us to be your alarm clock and help you wake up. Ding. Time to wake up. Time to be more aware of more of who you are, so that you can, with open eyes and certainty, live your life with full conviction, responding as you want to. Responding as you prefer to, no matter what's going on in your reality. And getting the effect from that response that you deserve, that you now know you deserve to get. Regardless of what anyone else is doing, regardless of what anyone else's intention toward you may be, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter anymore. You matter. What you say matters. Becomes matter. Energy to matter. Non-physical to physical. The effect comes from your willingness to have the conviction to know your relationship to whatever you experience, whoever you experience, no matter the situation, no matter the circumstances. While you are on Earth, for a while, you will still experience many people and many situations that are not reflective of your preference, because that's the nature of Earth. Many people will make the assumption that just because they are changing themselves, they will suddenly no longer have to ever interact with anyone who is not of their frequency. No. You are still on the Earth. It's still going to be a mix of things for a little while longer, but that's okay. It still gives you an opportunity to see in absolute example what you do and don't prefer. It always gives you a way to gauge where you're at relative to the things you see that you know are not who you are, who you prefer to be, who you prefer to deal with. So use that as an opportunity. Don't think there is something wrong just because, well, I've changed myself and I'm a more spiritual person, so why am I still getting people in my life that are not acting in a spiritual way? Shouldn't I be better than that? Shouldn't I be above that? Shouldn't I be beyond that? No! The idea, first of all, remember, is that you're on Earth. That's what Earth is all about. Polarity. Right now, it's still all about the idea of different examples of different ways of doing things, dark and light. And remember, the idea in integration is that you have something to integrate. If it's all just light, there's nothing to integrate. So, becoming more of yourself is also becoming more aware, not only of the light, but also of the dark. The more aware you become of the light and the dark choices, then the more you can choose openly and clearly what you prefer. It's not about excluding, it's about including. It's about knowing that you have choice still to go into the dark if you want to, but now it's knowing you don't have to. But that doesn't mean you won't see the dark choice. It means you'll become more aware of the dark choice. But now it means you become aware of the dark choice just as a choice, not as a given, not as an absolute, not as something that has more power over you, just as a neutral choice, like any other choice. It's just a choice. Hey, come into the dark. No thanks. Not because you're afraid. Just because you know it's not your preference. It's just not your preference. But in order to know it's not your preference, you have to be aware that it's a choice you could still make, and you can make that choice at any time. If you couldn't make that choice, if you were not aware you had the choice to go into the dark, you would not be a fully empowered being to make a choice to go into the light. That's the whole point. So don't think something is wrong because suddenly you are still finding yourself interacting with people who are not of the vibration of integrity. It's giving you an opportunity to decide whether or not you still want to play that game or whether you wish to make another choice. That's all right. They do not have any power to affect you as long as you do not agree to be affected. So that's why it's so important to respond differently as if you have changed no matter what's going on in the situation around you. And the way you get more in touch with the idea of who you are is by now beginning to really deeply understand your soul blueprint, what living this life is all about, what the theme is really all about, which is the freedom to choose no matter what. And allow yourself to move with conviction and commitment in that direction, but not in avoidance of anything. There is no avoiding. If you wish to grow and expand, you cannot avoid, because there is nowhere to avoid anything. There is nowhere to go. There is only here and now. You cannot run away from anything. You must invite it in and accept it as a part of who you are if you're really going to have the freedom to choose who you want to be. It's all about inclusion and integration, not exclusion and segregation anymore. That's the old pattern. That's not you anymore. If it was, we would not be having this conversation. So take that as a sign that it's time to know more of who you are. Be more of who you are and accept the dark and the light that you have and use it in a positive way. Just because you're aware of the dark doesn't mean you become the darkness. It just means you're aware of more of who you are, and that's a positive thing.
So that is a sample of the unfolding higher consciousness news around the world this week. Cosmic Vision News is broadcast weekly from the CosmicVisionNews.com website. Links to stories used in this broadcast are published in the show summary, which is also available on the website. CVN can be followed through its Facebook page, Scene page, and YouTube channel, as well as on Twitter, Google+, and LinkedIn. Thank you for sharing your time with me. I'm Jeffrey West, reminding you that when you are born into a world you don't fit in, it is because you were born to create a new one. The way of a miracle worker is to see all human behavior as one of two things, either love or as a call for love. Until our next moment of now, stay grounded in love, hold the vision of light and peace in your hearts, and keep those eyes rolling to the skies because disclosure is unfolding all around you. Namaste.